struggling with things today, that does not make you a bad person. You should not go around guilty and condemned because you've got some things to overcome. Many times it wasn't even your fault. Somebody else made the poor choices and now you're having to deal with it. But I would challenge you, don't use that as an excuse to stay the way you are. You got to dig your heels in and do something about it. And one of the first steps to overcoming is to recognize what you're dealing with. Identify it. Don't ignore it. Don't just try to sweep it under the rug and hope that it's going to go away. No, you've got to call a spade a spade. If you're lazy and undisciplined, don't make excuses. Just admit it and say, you know what? I'm going to deal with this. If you've got an anger problem, or if you're loose in your morals, or maybe you don't treat people right, don't try to convince yourself that you do. Admit it and deal with it. The scripture says in James 5:16, confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Notice, you've got to be honest enough with yourself to confess your faults. And sometimes you're going to have to find a good Christian friend and say, you know what, I need your help. I'm struggling in this area and I need you to pray with me. But so often we do just the opposite. We think, man, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. What would they think of me? I'd be embarrassed. No, swallow your pride and get the help you need so you can be free. I know this man, and he came out of a very violent, angry home. And he ended up getting hooked on drugs and selling drugs himself. And he was just living a very angry life altogether. But to make a real long story short, one day he gave his life to the Lord, and he started pastoring this church. And he was doing great. It was growing and growing. He was well respected in the community, going all over the place, sharing his story, how God had really changed his life. But what people did not know was that he still had a very serious anger problem. God had delivered him from all these other bad habits, addictions, drugs, alcoholism, but he still really struggled with this anger. And he would never show it in public, but if something went wrong at home, he'd just go into a fit of rage. I mean, it wasn't normal. He was violent, and he told how he could not control it. Many times the smallest, most insignificant things would just set him off, and he would erupt. And he was very abusive to his wife, physically and verbally. He would throw things and just treat her so bad. And really, it was a very dangerous situation. And when he would finally calm down, she would say to him, honey, we have got to go get some help. We've got to go talk to somebody about this problem. But he told how he was too embarrassed. He said, man, I'm the pastor of the church. I'm supposed to be the example. How could I ever tell anybody I've got this terrible problem? But see, the scripture says, confess your faults so you can be healed. And some of you today, and I don't mean this wrong, but you will never overcome what you're struggling with all by yourself. You've got to find a friend, a mentor, a pastor, a counselor. Find somebody that will stand with you. Find somebody that will pray with you. Find somebody that will hold you accountable. And the thing you've got to understand is just because you've got some things you're dealing with, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. And we have to get past this misconception that because we love God, and we come to church, and people look up to us, and man, we're supposed to be perfect. No, it doesn't always work that way. And if you have an anger problem today, or if you have a problem watching things that you shouldn't, maybe you've got some kind of hidden addiction, or maybe you're in a relationship you know you shouldn't be in, let me challenge you. Don't try to beat that on your own. And don't hide it because you're too embarrassed. Find a good Christian person that will stand in faith with you. And I'm not saying that you have to announce it to the world, but you need to find one person that you can really trust. And as you do your part, God will help you to overcome. This pastor told how the reason that he wouldn't tell anybody for a long time was because he thought something was wrong with him. He couldn't understand how God had delivered him from all these other bad addictions, but he still had this serious anger problem. And he told how even when he was enraged, even when he was out of control, deep down on the inside, he would be saying to himself, why am I doing this? Why can't I stop? What is wrong with me? The problem was that anger had been in his family line a long time. It wasn't as easy to overcome as some of those other habits. And he had to get past the fact of what everybody was going to think of him, and he went and got some help. And as he confessed his faults, and as he stood against the forces of darkness, God set him free completely. Today, he's one of the most kind, gentle people you will ever meet. And in the same way, you can beat anything that's come against you. Doesn't matter what it is. There's no addiction that's too hard for our God. There's no stronghold that he can't set you free from. Doesn't matter how long you've had it. Doesn't matter how many times you've tried and failed. Today is a new day. And if you will be honest with yourself and recognize what you're dealing with and find somebody to hold you accountable, then you too can start living under the blessing and not the curse. You can break that junk off of you and off of your descendants. And you may be here today and you were raised in a home just like this man, where it was violent, angry, negative, abusive. Maybe all you saw modeled growing up were bad habits, addictions, and abuse. But don't use that as an excuse to stay the way you are. You may have been dealt a very tough hand in life to deal with. Maybe the way you were raised is the reason you act a certain way. That may be the reason you get angry and you really struggle. But thank God you don't have to stay that way. And let me challenge you to take responsibility for your actions. God has given you your own free will. You can choose to change. You can choose to set the new standard. And every right choice you make, you start to overturn the wrong choices that other people have made. Every time you resist that temptation, you are one step closer to your victory. You may have a very negative history behind you, but you don't have to perpetuate it. We can't change the past, but we can change the future by making right choices today. But the sad thing is, most of the time, hurting people end up hurting other people. You would think when we come out of a negative environment, we would be so quick to change. You hear people say it all the time. Well, man, I'm never going to raise my kids like that. Or I'll never treat my wife the way my father treated my mother. But the truth is, more often than not, we end up doing exactly what we said we'd never do. It's because that spirit is being passed down. And if you were raised in an angry, violent home, unless you rise up and break that thing, there's a real good chance you will treat your children the same exact way. I know people that were abused physically and verbally growing up. And you would think since they suffered so much and went through all that pain, they would stay far away from it. But all the studies tell us people that have been abused are the most likely to become abusers. Why is that? It's not because they want to. They know how destructive it is. It's because that negative spirit keeps getting passed down from generation to generation. But thank God you and I can do something about it. The scripture says in Ephesians that our fight is not against flesh and blood, but we fight in the spiritual realm. It is a spiritual battle. And you got to rise up and say, I'm taking authority over this thing, and I am not going to live this way. And always remember, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. That means you can do what you need to do. Don't just sit back and accept the status quo. No, rise up and do something about it. We can't change the events of the past, but we can change our futures. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to make it easier on my children. I want to make it better for my grandchildren and for future generations. What I find interesting is women that were raised in abusive environments where they weren't treated right by their father or by the men in their life. When they grow up, most of the time, they will be attracted to a man just like that. Somebody that continues to abuse and mistreat them. Studies tell us that women very often will marry somebody just like their father. And that's why it's so important, fathers, that we go out of our way to love and respect our wives. Our children should see us being kind and courteous. You should open the car door for your wife. Do everything you can, knowing there's a very good chance your daughter is going to gravitate to somebody that's just like you. And I know Victoria's father, he treated her like a queen. I mean, when she was growing up, he was so kind and considerate and loving. He still is to this day. When she used to live at home, he'd go get her car filled up with gas for her, bring her breakfast in bed. Anything she needed, he was always there. And I know I'm not perfect. I'm probably not like that, but I hear Victoria saying all the time, Joel is just like my father. But see, that's what I want my children to see. I want them to see me being good to my wife.